Hi, it's John at cNation, and you are tuned into the Kush Journals. Join me and my occasional guests each weekday as we discuss all things cannabis in the great state of Utah. Hey, it's John at cNation, and you are tuned in to the Kush Journals. Happy Thursday. We have got a great show today. A couple of days ago, I had the great opportunity to speak with Morris Denton, Chief Executive of Compassionate Cultivation in Austin, Texas. If you remember, I spoke with him a couple of months ago when we were at the MJ BizCon Next conference in New Orleans, and that was a super interview. Our good friends at Grasslands lined up this interview for us, and it's really great. I will tell you, I had a rocky start that morning, and it probably shows through a little bit. I was a little bit grumpy, but the interview settled down a little bit. It turned out really great. Morris was awesome to call us from the road and to patch in like that. Not an easy interview, but it just shows you, what a determined and what a committed chief executive officer he is of, a really great CBD medicinal cannabis dispensary, complete vertical operation in Texas. So, without further stalling for time, here is that interview. Well, Morris, it's been a couple of months since we last spoke with each other, and it seems like a million things have happened. And I guess if you're outside of the cannabis industry, it just seems like it's a flurry, and if you're inside of it, well, I don't know, par for the course?
Maybe a combination. Maybe it's, there's certainly been a lot of things that have been happening in Texas and around Texas. Perhaps just a little bit of smoke and not a lot of fire. But
right.
I suppose time will tell.
Well, that's what I want to talk a little bit about, is what is and has been going on in Texas really just in the last handful of weeks there. It looks like there is some serious party and legislative movement towards some very positive developments regarding cannabis. And I was
yeah, let's hope so.
Well, you're on the medicinal side of the cannabis game, but it's got to be encouraging to see a majority of Texans in favor of decriminalizing for adult possession of small amounts, what they might call personal amounts. But in addition to that, movement towards an expanded list of conditions, all of that. Talk about that a little bit, if you will, just what really looks like from our perspective, a lot of very positive movement on a lot of fronts in Texas.
Yeah, it was kind of remarkable to hear the outcome, if you will, of the Texas Republican Party's annual convention, probably about a month or so ago now, I guess. And them, the Republican Party of Texas, adding 3 significant planks to their platform, right?
Right.
One being the decrim, as you speak of, another being the third being the potential creation of an industrial hemp market in Texas.
Right.
So, for a lot of people that are longtime watchers of the Texas Republican Party, it was nothing short of head spinning.
Right.
In some regards, that this conservative organization that has long opposed any form of sort of reasonable view into the cannabis industry would then suddenly almost do a 180. And yet they did. And so, for those of us that are in the cannabis industry, we certainly welcome that shift. But at the same time, I think that we're also treading with a heavy dose of reality, in the sense that even though the Republican Party in Texas may say, hey, this is what our party represents, reality is it's still up to each of the independent politicians. It's up to each legislator to decide, how they want to either incorporate or not their Republican Party's platform into their own platform.
Well, you raise a good point, Morris. As I looked at the latest polling information from Texas on this issue, even though it's 61% on the whole that are supportive of a lot of these measures, it's still anyone over 65 is against it, regardless of party and other affiliations. But also Republicans are against it 51-40. So your point really is valid. And even though 51% is a real manageable number when it comes to, educating and getting that out of minority status and into majority status, our direction, your point's real valid. There are still a majority of Republicans that aren't necessarily on board with all of this, and your state legislators obviously have to be quite cognizant of that.
Well, I think you got to be careful what you're talking about, John. If you're talking about decrim, then I think those numbers may be right. But if you're talking about funding of the Compassionate Use Program and the broader legalization of medical cannabis, I believe that even Republicans in Texas support that.
You're right. They're in the majority on all of that, and those were the decrim numbers that I was mentioning there.
Right. Yeah. I just think it's super important that we clarify exactly what we're talking about here, because decrim is a completely separate issue from what my business is focused on.
Oh, no question about that.
And so when we look at the numbers, we're hyper-focused on the polling as it hits and it relates to the Compassionate Use Program and as it relates to the legalization on a broader basis of cannabis for people with a variety of different medical conditions. Our personal point of view with decrim is separate from our business perspective. And so when we look at the polling numbers, there is a significant majority of Republicans and Democrats that support the broadening of the Compassionate Use Program and safer, broader legal access to medical cannabis.
Oh, that's 100% correct. I started this off talking about the decriminalization numbers because as those rise in any state, all of the other numbers rise too, because that's the slowest uptake is that full legalization, and decrim's not quite that, but it is that. Let's talk about your business and the business of medical cannabis in the country and in Texas. Now, it looks like, so you guys have a very narrow list right now in Texas, and it's literally like intractable epilepsy is the list of conditions. It looks as though there is a push to maybe open that list up to a doctor's discretion. Does that sound about right?
I suppose it depends on who you're talking to and how optimistic they want to, what color the lens is that they want to look through when they think about expansion. I spend a significant amount of my time talking with legislators, both Democrats and Republicans, very liberal all the way to, extraordinarily conservative. And, my read on it is that there will likely be expansion in 2019, but I believe that expansion will be somewhat modest. Our hope is that it's broader, but at the same time, I think it's important for everyone to sort of temper their optimism with the reality of meaning who the leaders are in the state and the conservative leadership that the state has. I don't think it's going to go to a doctor's discretion. If what you mean by that is a full medical marijuana legal market where it's up to each doctor to make their determination on whether or not patient A or patient B is able to receive legal access, I don't see any way that happens in 2019.
Yeah, perhaps that was some optimism from what recently happened in Oklahoma. That's roughly the program they put together there, and I'm sure it was a source of enthusiasm for a lot of medical cannabis activists and advocates around the country to see them, put a program together that is roughly that, doctor's discretion.
I think that is a reflection, John, of a ballot measure.
It was, right.
I mean, I think that, right? And so, I think that if it went to a ballot in Texas, I think that we could have a very similar outcome in Texas.
Right.
But it's not. That's not how it's going to happen in Texas. It's going to go through the legislative process. And as a result, I think that it's going to get tempered back pretty significantly.
So a much more modest approach, but you would expect the list of qualifying conditions to expand in your next legislative session, yes?
I think it could. I think it kind of depends on who gets on board with what bill and who are the authors of that bill and what that bill contains. In other words, I think that there could be some momentum around picking up where House Bill 2107 left off, which was a very broad piece of legislation that would allow for a full medical marijuana market across a range of conditions. And, that bill had some measure of, they had 77 co-sponsors and 0 detractors. It just didn't make it, out of calendars into a sufficient space from a legislative perspective to gain any real traction. So I think that there could be a base of support around that. I think there could be other bills that may emerge that could focus on very specific conditions. I think there could be some momentum around, instead of it being viewed from a condition perspective, it could be viewed more from a symptom or a diagnosis perspective,
right,
where a symptom might be prevalent across a range of conditions instead of making it very condition driven. It could be, hey, look, if this person is exhibiting these symptoms, then these symptoms would then qualify that individual for access. What I think is important in Texas, and what's going to be real interesting, is whether or not there is momentum behind increasing the level of THC in the medicine.
Right.
That to me is going to be a real key inflection point in the debate. I think that if we're able to use the same medicine but treat a broader population of people, I think that there's going to be larger appetite for getting behind that than there is in the potential of expanding the amount of THC that is in the medicine. So, where I kind of see, if I were to look through my crystal ball, what I would see is some expansion either in conditions or in symptoms/diagnoses where the medicine is roughly similar to what we currently have today. I could see the legislature getting behind that and supporting that.
Nice. So are there still just 3 license holders in Texas?
There's still 3, yes, sir.
And still just 1 dispensary?
Well, I mean, we're the only, out of the 3 licensees, we're the only one that has a retail dispensary.
Right.
All of us distribute our products throughout the state.
Oh, I got you. I don't think that was actually clear to me that all 3 of you were operating, but yeah, good.
Well, let me be real clear on this one, John. So the 2 out of the 3 of us are operating and are currently providing medicine to people throughout the state. That's us, Compassionate Cultivation, and then Knox Medical. The 3rd licensee, Certera, has yet to get to the point where they're truly operational. They've had a couple of different setbacks that have, basically impeded their ability to make real progress. That said, I think they're expecting to come online sometime in the next 3 to 6 months. So, but 2 out of 3 are operational and distributing medicine throughout the state.
Well, though I'm sure you don't mind your position of being one storefront and one of 2 operating licensees in Texas. Texas, I guess you would also agree that there's a lot of room for expansion in your state, right?
Well, I think that there's a lot of room for enhancements to the compassionate use program. I think that Texas purposely started with a narrow, restrictive program in order to ensure that both the businesses as well as the medical community could accurately and effectively provide the right kind of medicine to the people that needed it, that we could demonstrate proficiency and capability in doing so, and that the medical community could start to gain trust and confidence in the medicine that's being produced. And then, based on the assumption that we do all that well, then being able to broaden and expand from there, I think, is on the table. And so far, I feel like we've met those expectations, if not exceeded those expectations. And so, we think that there's plenty of room for expansion to include other conditions, as well as potentially our ability to expand our footprint so that we can more effectively serve the state of Texas, which is a big state. And right now we have a small fleet of cars and drivers that are all over the state on really any given day. We deliver throughout the state 6 days a week, and we have customers from the top of the panhandle all the way down to the tip of the bottom, the southernmost part of the state down in Brownsville,
right,
and points in between. And so we're confident and capable and make those deliveries every day. We're ready when the state's ready to expand. However, the state
well, you have a very stringent, I'll call it chain of evidence for lack of a better term for that. All of your delivery drivers, they launch out of Austin and return every day, right? Because your chain of, what's the right word? I guess I'm missing it. But you have very strict protocols on that medicine from seed to customer, do you not?
We do. It's a vertically integrated state, which requires that we have 100% chain of control from seed all the way through to delivery to the end customer, to the patient. Within that, from a distribution and delivery perspective, we're not required to have our delivery vehicles do everything in a single day back and forth from Austin. There are stipulations within the regulations that we have to adhere to, where if one of our drivers is staying overnight, in Tyler, Texas, for example, there are things that driver needs to do to ensure that the medicine that he or she is delivering stays in a safe place. But we're not, it's not an easy requirement. It's not. The challenge with the distribution is, we're not a logistics company. We're a medical cannabis company. We would prefer to be able to utilize third-party distribution and delivery services, but right now we're not able to, and so we're doing what we need to do in order to get the medicine into the hands of the patient and remain within compliance.
Well, and that even precludes you from having any outlier warehouses that are your own. Is that correct? Your medicine has to originate from Austin for deliveries, right?
Correct. I mean, we grow everything, because we're vertically integrated, we do everything under one roof in Austin. And then when the medicine is completed and ready and we have an active prescription and we have a delivery manifest that's set up with a route plan before it leaves the facility, only then can we put it into the car, into the safe in the car, and then send the driver on their way.
Right.
So it's not like we can set up distribution centers and throughout the state. We wouldn't do that right now anyway. We don't have enough patients that would warrant that. That would make that feasible from a business perspective.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk on a national level a little bit. I've been in and around this industry for a lot of years, and every year it seems like we all say, this is the year there's going to be a lot of movement on cannabis for the positive. The feds are going to finally do this, that, or the other. Well, every year goes by, and of course none of that really happens. But this does look like an active year. This looks like an active political year in terms of cannabis. I mean, we've got some big name senators and congressmen that have introduced real cannabis bills at the federal level. And though they've done that in past years, it seems like there is some movement. Now there are candidates of both parties, both major political parties around the country, that have at least stuck the cannabis feather in their cap, if not almost made it their entire platform, depending on where they live in this country. What do you think about any real movement towards towards maybe the feds getting out of the state's game here in cannabis anytime soon?
Well, I think we can all hope. I don't know, John. I see a lot of momentum, and I see a lot of effort. And I think that there are some real, tangible things that represent significant potential for big change. For example, GW Pharma's recent approval by the FDA to have their cannabis-based medicine, Epidiolex, approved by the FDA, which occurred at the end of June. What's going to happen now is that the DEA has to make the determination around how to schedule Epidiolex.
Right.
If the DEA decides that the scheduling of Epidiolex, which is essentially crystallized CBD that's made in the same way that we make our medicine in our facility in Austin, Texas, the only difference is that their product does not contain any THC and ours contains 0.5% THC.
Right.
If the DEA comes back and determines that CBD is no longer a Schedule 1, but a Schedule 2, 3, or perhaps even a Schedule 4, then the domino effect of that will be significant. Just the fact that the FDA has said, hey, Epidiolex, which is a cannabis-based medicine, which is made with CBD, has medicinal value, is huge. It's the first time a federal agency, to my knowledge, has ever come out and said something to that extent. So, in my opinion, that will have a huge impact, a huge domino impact on the broader medical cannabis market.
Indeed.
So that's one thing that to me represents real, tangible evidence of change. So, and we can build off of that, right? So, meanwhile, as you said, John, there are plenty of other legislators that are out there that are all powerful, that represent big, powerful states that are taking aim and really getting behind supporting this, not just from a medical perspective, but even from a broader perspective, and hoping to get, take away some of the challenges that we face in the cannabis industry from a banking perspective.
Right.
If any of those things should happen, all of a sudden you start to see, significant, real, tangible momentum behind change, behind transformation around how this industry can finally start to evolve and mature and be able to act and breathe and operate like real businesses like we deserve.
Well, no question about that. And it seems like GW Pharmaceuticals, and they're not the only one, but specifically, they have another half dozen or so drugs lined up to present to the FDA. And I'm sure they feel like they're going to be as successful with those as they are with their Epidiolex. Speaking of their drug, what do you have any thoughts about seizure-specific medicine that's cannabis-based that has no THC in it versus yours that has a little bit, and versus what it seems like everybody else's that has a little bit of THC in it? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, from my perspective and in my conversations with our chief medical officer, Dr. Karen Keogh, who's a board-certified pediatric neurologist and epileptologist who got her medical degree from Johns Hopkins University, the belief and the opinion is that Epidiolex, which contains no THC, has an impact and received FDA approval because it has an impact on reducing seizures in epilepsy, namely Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome, which are the two that is high. It's a fairly high dosing that is required in order to demonstrate efficacy from a seizure reduction perspective. And yet we are seeing a similar set of success on a far lower dosing because of the prevalence of THC in our medicine. That's anecdotal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? From a medical perspective, the evidence that we're seeing in seizure reduction on a lower dosing of CBD because of the presence of THC is anecdotal. Yet at the same time, it is evident. From our perspective, when we think about the FDA's approval of Epidiolex, we view it very much from a glass-is-half-full perspective.
Sure.
As opposed to viewing it as being a competitive situation that could put our relationship with our patients at risk. Sure, we may have some patients that end up wanting to wait until they can get access to an FDA-approved and therefore potentially insurance-covered treatment regime. But we're also seeing a significant amount of success with the number of our patients where they have seen not just a reduction in seizures, but actually an elimination of seizures. We have, about 10% of our patient base are what Dr. Keogh refers to as the super responders, where, they had gone for, years where they would have 20, 30, 40 seizures a week, a month, a big number of seizures.
Right.
And now, since being on our medicine, they've had 0 seizures. And in some cases, we've seen this over the span of 12, 13, 16 weeks, a significant amount of time. The super responders are rare, but they are there. Again, it represents about 10% of our overall population base. And then another 20% of our population base are responding very well. They're seeing a reduction in the number of seizures, a reduction in the intensity of those seizures, an ability to reduce the amount of other medicines, medicines that they may be on, and the corresponding side effects of those medicines. They're seeing an improvement in their cognitive capabilities, and in kids, they're seeing a reduction in behavioral issues, right? So,
right.
So we're seeing 30% of our overall patient base seeing great success, but in total, around a 60 to 70% return rate out of all of our patients. Whether or not they can accurately and consistently depict why they feel that it's improved their quality of life, they're still coming back because they feel like it has improved their quality of life.
Well, that was the next thing I was going to ask you to touch on, is the absence of seizures automatically has to mean a quality of life improvement, does it not?
Well, an absence of seizures absolutely does. Absolutely does. But with some of our patients, they may not actually have a reduction in the number of seizures or in the intensity of those seizures, but they could have a better cognitive capability, right? Where, one of the things that we hear is, they just feel, when they're talking about, this is usually parents that are talking about their kids, they just feel like their kid is more engaged and more awake and more involved and, more active in the family dynamic. That's something we hear a lot, even though they may still have roughly the same number of seizures, or those seizures may be of the same form and intensity, or they may, especially in kids, not have as many behavioral issues. If you're a child and you're suffering from epilepsy, sometimes you don't know how to respond. You don't know how to act. You don't know how to, engage with people around you. And so, unfortunately, we see a fair amount of aggressive behavior in kids.
Right.
And so, if there is a reduction in those behavioral issues, then that's an improvement in their quality of life. That's an improvement in the family dynamic. That's an improvement from the parent's perspective, in particular, about how their kid is responding to this medication.
Hey, I want to shift gears here. We've been having a discussion amongst my circle of friends and influencers, etc., regarding the issues of cannabis as an economic engine in any form, and how revenue oriented we are in this country. You know, we're a nation of capitalists, and I was saying, it seems to me that every nook and cranny of this country, every municipality should just be jumping into full-blown cannabis legalization. I mean, with both feet, as large and as wide as possible. It creates jobs, it creates wealth, it creates tax revenue, it helps medical patients, it helps people in general. And yet, as in tune with these things as we are in this country, it does not seem to be the primary driver of cannabis legalization on any form. Do you think that it is such a personal issue that really does override the economic upside?
Well, let's talk about cannabis as an economic driver in a state like Texas.
Okay.
And let's just kind of look at it objectively. Let's say that in Texas, let's just hypothesize here for a minute, and let's say that the cannabis industry in Texas, if it were to become a full medical market and a legal recreational market, and let's say that then is a $10 billion a year industry in Texas, which some people forecast that it could be if it were to go full rec, right?
Sure.
Only second to California in its size. And let's say that out of that $10 billion a year, that let's put a pretty high tax on it. Let's say it's a 20% tax base. Okay?
Yep.
That's $2 billion a year in tax revenue into the state. That's nothing to sneeze at. That is a big number based on any measure from any point of view.
For sure.
$2 billion in additional tax revenue is a significant amount of dollars that can flow into the state's coffers. And yet, do you know what the overall annual budget is for the state of Texas?
I actually don't. Go ahead.
About $120 billion annually.
So that's about a 1%, 1.5% your $2 billion in tax revenue. I gotcha.
So, when you think about the impact, and you look at it just subjectively, empirically, $2 billion is a lot of money, yet on a percentage basis. And so I think in order for us as an industry to have a real meaningful argument to incentivize change, we have to look beyond what the financial upside is from an industry perspective.
Right.
We have to look at the benefit to the communities, to the municipalities in other ways. Right? That could be an overall economic engine. Because when you're just looking at it like we just did from a tax basis perspective,
right.
that's only one data point, right? That doesn't include the amount of jobs that are include, the other kind of economic carry-alongs that a industry would provide for a community.
Right.
And so, I have been cautioned early on about leaning into the economic argument because of its, on a percentage basis, fairly low impact to a state like Texas. And instead, trying to look at it and trying to look at it very rationally from, within Texas, from an efficacy perspective on improving the quality of the lives of the people in Texas. Because when you look at it from that point of view, if you're improving the quality of lives of people with a variety of different medical conditions, if you're adding tax revenue to the state, if you're also creating jobs, the sum total of those things is far greater, than just a single kind of threat from a tax basis perspective.
Right. Well, that's pretty fascinating. I think there are big things in store for the state of Texas regarding positive movement in the cannabis industry. I think it'll probably roughly stay a medical industry for quite a while, which is perfectly great. That's an area of cannabis that I'm actually deeply passionate about. Morris, hey, I want to thank you for your time today. I had a frustrating morning.
Good to talk with you.
Yeah, for sure. I had a little bit of a frustrating morning, so I got off to a rocky start here, but it settled down.
to Texas and to what we're seeing. We're super excited about what's happened in Texas over the last 6 months, really, since we had our medicine available in February.
Right.
And we're very encouraged by the conversations that we're engaged in, and also the conversations that are happening around us. And I am rooting for the broadest possible expansion from a medical perspective in the state of Texas. But at the same time, what we don't want to have happen is another 2017 where a bill got presented, there was momentum behind it, but ultimately it didn't pass.
Right.
We as an industry cannot just accept moral victories anymore. We have to see expansion. We have to see momentum, and that momentum needs to be tangible. And so that's where we're investing a lot of our time, effort, and energy, is to make sure that we can provide the great, true facts and data that we're seeing in the efficacy of this medicine on people with epilepsy, how we're running the business, and where this medicine can have additional impact. And that, combined with all the great changes that we're seeing with the Texas Republican Party, the Democrats are already there. We're hopeful, we're optimistic that your opinion that great things are in store for Texas.
Well, Morris, look, from our perspective, everything that you've done, your chief medical officer, everything happening at Compassionate Cultivation, you guys have presented the case for expansion in Texas. There's no question about it. And we wish you all the success in the world and the state of Texas. Hopefully here in Utah in November, we're going to do the right thing and be following in some very good footsteps.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, I think if Oklahoma is any proof, if you put it to a vote, generally speaking, the voters will come out. I mean, Oklahoma had a 200% increase in voter turnout due to the medical marijuana measure being on the ballot.
Hey, Morris, I'm going to let you go back to your family vacation. Gosh, I appreciate that you took the time out. I really appreciate it.
Always good to talk with you, sir.
It is with you, too. Thank you both very much. Thanks, Morris. Well, as you can clearly tell, there is a lot of great things happening in the state of Texas and nationally, of course. And man, what a conscientious chief executive Morris really is, right? This is a guy that's got his thumb on the total pulse of the cannabis industry in Texas. I want to thank Morris Denton for taking the time out of his, his personal time to give me a call and to conduct this interview with me. And I also want to thank our good friends at Grasslands for setting this up for us. Emily Trigg, thank you very much. We really appreciate the nod of confidence that you give to our podcast and appreciate all of the great clients that you've brought our way for interviews. Thanks and have a great day, everyone. Kush Journals is a copyrighted broadcast of the South American Gold Corporation. We appreciate your likes and shares on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.